Want to know what's coming up next for Lightburn in 2022? Stick around while I talk to Jason from Lightburn to find out. Now, just before the holiday season, I was able to touch base with Jason from Lightburn, where we discussed what was next for Lightburn as we head into 2022. And we talked about how to run multiple copies of Lightburn on your computer at the same time, as well as managing multiple laser cutters with the same copy of Lightburn, and much, much more. I even bugged him to spill some of the beans early about some of the upcoming features. Sorry, Jason. But before we jump into our chat with Jason, be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming tutorials and projects based around Lightburn. And don't forget to join the Laser Livestream Facebook group where you can share your projects and meet like-minded laserologists exploring what they can create with their laser. You'll want to keep connected because as 2022 reveals itself, so will the Laser Livestream community. And I promise you, you won't want to miss out on what's coming up next. But for now, let's jump into my conversation with the man behind Lightburn and hang in there till the end to discover some of the upcoming features that will take your productivity in Lightburn to the next level. And one of the things that came up that I realized I didn't even know was an option that on a PC you can open up multiple Lightburn windows. So you can have Lightburn sending the job to your laser and then working on another job.
You can do that anyway, believe it or not.
Can you do it on a Mac though?
You can.
Okay.
So two little tidbits here. Number one, when you click start and Lightburn is running the job on your laser, you can just open another file at that point.
Oh,
the file that is being sent to your laser gets built up as a job of G-code, or if you're using a DSP laser, it'll be built up in whatever the instruction format of that machine is. But it's just stored in memory, and it goes into a buffer, and then the software itself just starts sending it to the laser, and you can open a new file and start working on a new file, and that job will just progress just as it did before. You can't shut down Lightburn because that will stop it, and it should warn you if you try to do that.
Just close that clamshell and you're in trouble.
Yeah, but you can open a new file while you have a job running. Lightburn handles that, and it's designed to. We often get people asking, why can't I change my speed settings or my power settings? Or, it's not at this point in the job yet, and I wanted to move that little bit of text over. Well, sorry, once you've said start, it builds the file, takes that entire thing in memory, and is now streaming it to the laser, and I don't have the ability to do that.
You can't change it on the fly as it's cutting, is basically what they're asking for.
Yeah. But you can open another instance of Lightburn as well. There's nothing to prevent that. If you wanted to be working on a different file with different settings and you wanted to keep the one that was running loaded and ready just in case there was a problem, if you needed to pause it or stop it or fix something, that makes it easier. So yeah, you can absolutely just launch a second instance of Lightburn. Most people, when they run Lightburn, will double click on a Lightburn file and that launches Lightburn. By default, Lightburn has a setting that says open whatever I'm trying to open in the running copy of Lightburn.
Right.
But you can turn off that setting and then it'll just open a new window for you. Or you can just go to your desktop and click the Lightburn icon to launch your second copy. On Mac and Linux, the operating system itself actively tries to prevent you from doing that. But there is a command that you can type in the terminal or the console window, which will open an application multiple times. And I can't remember for the life of me what that command actually is. But if you just Google multiple instances Mac OS, or how to launch multiple instances on Mac OS, it's a fairly short command. And I know a few people who've made it so that the Lightburn icon in their applications folder is actually that command script instead.
Oh, very cool.
So that they just double click on it and it will launch the first copy, and then they double click it again and it'll launch the second copy. And yeah. And you can also just make a copy of the entire application in your applications folder on Mac. So you have Lightburn and you can just duplicate the app and call it Lightburn 2, and then you can just run the second copy when you want to. That way is the less technical way to do it.
Right, that's actually how I got around it for my own purposes. With the new year around the corner, what do Lightburn users have to look forward to?
Let's see, what can I share? Yeah, like there's a few things that we have coming that are fairly big that I'm keeping under wraps for now.
Okay.
Damn it.
I'm paying you the big money. You gotta. No, sorry.
So, let me see. What have I got here?
It's okay, everyone. I'm gonna bother Jason from now till the reveal. I'll be emailing him every day with my Lightburn log saying, "Here's the information. Why doesn't it work? What's the new reveal?"
So one of the things that we're trying to do is handle people who have multiple machines better. So that's something that we're seeing more and more. People will start with a diode laser like the Emblazer, and they'll add a CO2 to their arsenal, or they'll have a CO2 already and they'll get, a diode laser because they do nice engraving work, or they're, just something that's smaller that they can play with. The way Lightburn is set up right now, when you move back and forth between machines in the software, the material library is just loaded, based on whatever you last loaded. We're changing that so that the material library preference follows the type of laser you've chosen. So if you have an Emblazer and a CO2 laser, for example, and you flip between them, it will automatically load the last material library that you had with that machine.
Awesome.
And so one less thing for you to remember. On top of that, we are planning on making it so that the material library has a live link option. Meaning, if you say, I have a job and I'm going to run it on my Emblazer and I'm going to use the 3mm birch plywood cut through mode for this layer, and then you load that same project into a different profile, which is for a CO2 laser, if that profile has a material library that also has 3mm birch ply cut through, then the software will just automatically use that setting instead. And the idea there, we're hoping, is that it's going to make it simpler for people to move back and forth between different machines.
That's
if
awesome.
You set up a job on one piece of hardware and then you import that or bring in that file and try to run it on a different laser, if you have your library set up appropriately, it would just translate those settings for you. And it'll never be perfect, but it'll probably get you a lot closer.
I really like that idea, because you know what materials you're going to use for both lasers. If you're using a CO2, you'd obviously have acrylic in there, but you would still want to have the options for the same things. Let's say you were using for a diode. The idea of being able to go into the CO2 laser and then pull up those settings, and I guess you would have to almost have a mirror library set up in the same way. That saves a lot of time, and it also would probably save a lot of wasted material if you forget to do it, and you're thinking, I'm going to use the CO2 laser for it, but I've got it on the diode settings. Well, that's a lot smaller. That's going to burn all the way through, let alone have a risk of maybe even igniting the material.
Yeah, so that one's a big one. We've added what else coming in the next version. We have, so Lightburn has always stored backups for you on CO2 machines or even on G-code machines. On the Emblazer doesn't have this because the Emblazer has an SD card in it that all of the settings are on. But most G-code based lasers running Gerbil allow you to change firmware settings through the console or through the machine settings editor in Lightburn. And CO2 lasers are the same. If you open that machine settings editor in Lightburn and change things, Lightburn makes a copy of whatever the originals were and stores a backup in a backup folder for you. And a lot of people just don't know that it does this until they ask us, hey, I lost all my settings, or I changed something and I can't get it back. And we tell them, oh, you can just go to this folder. So we've formalized that now. So in the machine settings window, you can click load backup and it'll pop open a window and show you all of the backups that it's kept. And you can kind of tab through them and see, what the date they were stored, which machine it was for, that kind of thing.
Awesome.
And we do the same thing with your preferences. So if you mess something up in Lightburn, like, oh, I lost one of my windows and I can't figure out how to get it back, or I changed a setting and I don't remember what I changed, you can, or I deleted one of my lasers and I didn't mean to, or anything. If it's stored in the preferences, we have a preferences browser that will let you go backwards through the prefs, and you can see what all of the different devices were in that file and what date it was saved and so on. And so it's a much easier way to restore your old settings and pull them in and out. So that's, go ahead.
That sounds wonderful, and I know that there's other things coming down, because you're going, hey, what can I tell you? So I'm really looking forward to seeing what 2022 does bring on the Lightburn front. I do want to ask this question though, because I get it a lot. From my last interview, you did mention about the idea of Lightburn being able to provide service for other CNC machines and other CNC based machines, and there's a lot of comments that are like, this is going to change everything for me, do it now. Has there been any movement on being able
to? For CNC machines, no. I would expect that it's probably not going to happen for about a year.
Okay.
People
are crying right now. I'm telling you, people are like, nah, what? A year?
It comes down to
I'm buying a Cricut.
Yeah. Well, a Cricut isn't a CO2 or isn't a CNC machine.
No,
but,
I understand that. But when I said CNC, I meant computer-controlled device.
Yeah.
I didn't mean specifically a router or something like that.
Yeah, we have actually been playing with support for vinyl cutters, and silhouette cutting machine I actually have working. Cricut gets a little touchy.
It's a sore point for a lot of people who have those machines.
They are very protective of their ecosystem. They're a little bit like Glowforge in that respect, that they don't want anybody else to play in their sandbox. And that is not entirely a fair way of putting it. There was a piece of software called Sure Cuts a Lot that added Cricut support, and Cricut sent them a cease and desist using the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the United States. The big reason that happened, as far as I know, was that the Sure Cuts a Lot software allowed people to download licensed content and export it in other formats and manipulate it.
Okay.
So if you had Marvel or Disney or My Little Pony or whatever, vector graphics and projects, and companies like Glowforge and Cricut, they provide a lot of content that comes from licensors.
Sure.
And those companies are extremely protective of their assets. Like if you had a Mickey Mouse project and it actually came from Disney, and Disney found out that, users were just copying it and changing it, and, Disney wasn't getting their licensing fee, Disney would go after whoever it was that wrote that software. And so they in turn have to go after whoever it was that, cracked it open and allowed people to copy it. So, in some respects, their hands were tied. So if we do Cricut support, and I can't say that we will, but if we ever did it, it would have to be kind of in cooperation with them, so that, or at least we would have to have their blessing.
Sure.
For that reason, or, we just have to be very, very careful about which lines we cross and make sure that we're not doing anything that could get anyone in legal trouble. You did once you get the lawyers involved.
Yeah, no, we don't want lawyers. We're here about helping people on their journey using computer-controlled devices and lasers and hopefully vinyl cutters too. But we're not into showing people the law through the fact that it's applied to us. You did mention vinyl cutters. Is that something that you've been looking at, using Lightburn to provide another way of being able to create projects?
I have an older Silhouette Cameo actually working in Lightburn. I can talk to it. I can send it, files. I've done, I've used the pen tool to draw with it and so on. So we've figured out that protocol, and we actually had that probably 8 months ago or so. But because of other priorities and shifting priorities and just how busy we are in general, ramping up training, new staff, new developers has taken priority. And, we have companies like Darkly who are working on their own things, their whatever their next big thing is, and they will come to us and ask, how difficult would it be for you to implement feature X, because that is a thing that we want to have for our users. And so we're prioritizing those kinds of things and trying to shuffle, all of these different expectations that we have from customers as well as vendors. And looking at what features or what things can we do that give the largest benefit to the most people? And we tend to prioritize things that affect our current users more than things that affect potential customers.
Sure.
And I want to stay that way for as long as I can. If you have Lightburn and you encounter a bug, for example, if you're unable to get a particular file to load, and it should, if you send that file to us and I can figure out why it's not loading, I will fix that first, because that is potentially something that affects a large number of users.
Of course. And
those are the things that we want to address in the nearest term. And then the other stuff kind of gets pushed off as a result. And so
I don't care. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure that people are going to sit there and say, but you had it ready 8 months ago. Do it. It's like, come on, man.
But I had it working 8 months ago. There is a big difference between working and ready.
Do you ever think, because there are so many people with so many different machines, and talking about just vinyl cutters, there are so many vinyl cutters out there, old machinery that's no longer supported, or the software kind of was glitchy and buggy, and it was really designed to make the machines function for a sale as opposed to, continual support.
We call that minimum viable product.
Yes, there's a big part of that. So do you see a day maybe where there's a possibility that some users could have their own version of an SDK that would allow them to be able to kind of play with settings and see if Lightburn would be able to talk to old hardware, or is that just a pain? Should I have not have said that, and that's just Pandora's box?
It's a little bit of Pandora's box. A lot of the way that Lightburn communicates is abstracted. We have this separation between the design part of Lightburn and the part that runs the machine.
Right.
And the part that runs the machine is used by the design part to ask what features are supported, what controls should I show to the user.
Sure.
So as an example, min power. If you have a G-code machine, most of the time you won't see the min power setting because it's not relevant to you. There's a frequency setting, there's a PPI setting, there are a bunch of other settings like that that are only valid on specific types of hardware. And so, the software asks, does this machine, do you support this? And that machine will say, nope, sorry, and they'll hide it. Or in Lightburn, we hide it. When adding new types of devices, we often have to expand that set of questions that the software can be asked, and change things in the software to give a better user experience, hide controls that aren't relevant. Things may work differently on a vinyl cutting machine. As an example, you don't really jog a vinyl cutter.
No.
That is a thing that you just generally don't do. You just don't jog a vinyl cutter. And so the entire move window would probably just go away.
I would say, when you frame something on a vinyl cutter, you're probably going to have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's things like that where it's not just about, can I talk to the machine and can I get this job to execute on that machine? There is a massive amount of user interface stuff that we need to tweak, change, hide, embellish, potentially even replace. There may be settings that are relevant to a vinyl cutter that have nothing to do with a laser cutter. One good example is corner cutting. On a vinyl cutter, the way that you cut corners is you overextend because you're dragging a blade knife, and then you sort of pull an arc around and then continue. And you would never do that on a CO2 machine. You would never do that on a CNC machine. You would never do that on, most of the other types of hardware. But on a vinyl cutter, you have to do that. And so we will add a control for that, and we'll make it so that it only shows up for vinyl. And, there may be things under the hood where we have to add it to the cut settings, and on and on and on.
You've definitely answered that question. I thought, I just thought it'd be just, there seems to be a little bit of more kind of nuances.
The short version is it's not simple.
Yes.
Well, it's not nearly as simple as you might think.
I know a lot of people got very excited after our last interview about the idea of using Lightburn as a one-stop shop to lay out designs and then be able to set it to multiple machines, not just multiple lasers, but multiple types of machines. And, having a vinyl cutter...
We'll get there. We definitely will. I would love to get there, and it is definitely our intention. I've used this, or I've had this conversation with a couple of other people, and they've asked, what will the name be? And I'm like, oh, it'll still be Lightburn,
Sure.
but we'll probably change it to, you know, better software for digital fabrication or something like that.
Awesome.
You know, and that's kind of what I would like us to get to, is be sort of a one-stop shop for any kind of machine that is 2D, 2.5D. So vinyl cutting, plasma cutting, water jet, lasers, you know, like a laser plotter with a pen tool in it, whatever. You know, I don't expect we're going to get into CAD CAM machining and trying to take over for Fusion 360. But I think there's a lot of ways that,
if you're gonna go and try that, I'm right behind you. Whatever you want to try. I mean, it'd be amazing if one day, you know, I'm driving in California and I see the Lightburn building as opposed to the Autodesk building. So
we're a while from that yet, but
I don't know. I mean,
maybe not as long as I think. I don't know. I didn't expect to make it this far. So
well, we're very, very glad that you have, because again, the amount that people are able to create, and I see it every day. I see people always, hey, I just bought this laser. What software do I get? And they go Lightburn, and they're like, great. I want to do a side hustle. I want to start a home business. You know, it's amazing to see what people are able to create, what they're able to, the ability for the hardware is one thing, but really Lightburn is the nerve center for how you run your machine. And
it's pretty cool. Like I enjoy seeing the diversity of stuff that people make with it. You know, we see a lot of people who are, you know, engraving tiles or making simple cutouts or things like that. But you also see like just some crazy levels of creativity. We had one user post on the Created with Lightburn group, and he had made this geodesic dome that was human size. Like it was a room, and there was a fire pit in the middle.
Wow.
And like, you know, and he cut out all of the individual panels with designs on this gigantic flatbed laser out of sheets of plywood. And, you know, it was not a small project. And that's one scale. And we've also seen like somebody did a wall art piece, and I want to say it was like the world map, but I'm not sure if that's correct. It might have just been 1 or 2 continents, but it was huge. Like it was really, really big, like probably 4 or 5 feet. And they did it with a little Ortour laser. And they used the print and cut and registration features to be able to just take their machine and like move the machine into, you know, over the various sections and cut it all out of one very large sheet of plywood.
Wow.
And I thought that was really cool. Like
incredibly creative.
Yeah. And just stuff like that. Like if, you know, we give you the tools, I don't necessarily tell them how I expect you to use them. It's like, here are some tools we made. I hope you find neat things to do with them, and people do. And it's really rewarding to see when, you know, somebody comes up with a use for something that was maybe something I envisioned, but maybe taking it a step further, or maybe something I didn't think of at all. So
we have the opposite. On the live stream, we have a viewer who is a grandmother, isn't able to join us live on YouTube, but she makes these amazing gifts for her grandchildren, and they're, you know, the scale is tiny. So half the photos that she ends up sending us is next to like a matchbox that's filling most of the frame.
That's cool.
And she's making, she made a piano, she made I believe it was a wolf, because one of her granddaughters wrote an amazing story about the adventures of a wolf, and ended up putting this 3-dimensional wolf together, and then engraved the box, and every surface on the box has either a message or a graphic put onto it. And the thing that I love the most is that she signs her work. So she'll take a popsicle stick and she'll engrave her name and the information on the popsicle stick, and then cut that out, and that becomes a little plaque. And I mean, we're talking minuscule, tiny little things. And every time I get an email from Elaine, I'm like always in awe, because those projects are imbued with so much love that that her grandchildren will have for the rest of their life. And it's not something that you can go into a store. It's great to go big, but I'm also amazed at the work, the skill that
it's
is
like
created.
If you have a machine that's well assembled, well tuned, that kind of thing. Like the detail you can get out of these things is just astounding. And I write the software, I know how it works, and I'm still every once in a while I'll do something and like, damn, that is tiny. How does that even work? And yeah.
In fact, I believe I saw an example of that on Facebook just the other week, where it was like, whoa, look at this. I just tried this out. And I was like, wow, all right, man. Like, your video, it never happened. Someone just sent that to you.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. Jason, thank you so much for coming on and rapping with us again here on the Laser Livestream. It is always fun to be able to have you here live and have a conversation about what is going on in the world of Lightburn. And also to discover some of the things that are going to be coming out in the next versions of Lightburn. And I'm super curious as to finding out what the big things are going to be. It's like a kid. You get that message that says Lightburn, update for Lightburn. Do you want to download it? It's like, hell yeah, I want to download that, and I want to see the notes to see what has been either added in or fixed up. It's always like a Christmas day.
Yeah, we have a long list. Like for the next one, I'm looking at it. It's probably like 40 or so things right now.
He's
and
teasing
now
us. It's just
40 bullet points.
That's the whole point.
So, well, as an example, like the cut shapes tool.
Yep.
You can now use it with images. It will generate a copy of the image that has the inside and the outside of the cut. It only works with. Yeah, so if you're cutting up a job and it happens to include engraved images, you can still do that, and we couldn't do that before. So that one's a simple one.
Yeah.
I've got a thing in Lightburn now that have you ever used SVGNest?
Not SVGNest, no.
Okay. If you've heard of it, or DeepNest.
DeepNest I've definitely used.
Okay, so SVGNest was the precursor to DeepNest.
Okay.
They're basically the same tech. DeepNest is a slightly more advanced version of it. But we don't have a nesting feature in Lightburn, and nesting is another one of those things that's incredibly complicated. I think I mentioned that was actually the thing that is just really, really damn complicated to do. We want to, and it's being worked on, but SVGNest exists and it's free. So I've added the ability for Lightburn to export an SVG file that is tagged with special information.
Oh.
You load that SVG file into SVGNest. SVGNest does its magic and nests your file. And then Lightburn just pops up a dialog that says, tell me when it's done. You click OK, and it loads the file that SVGNest spits out and doesn't modify your project at all. It basically, all of the shapes that were in your project, it pulls the information out of SVGNest's output and figures out which of those pieces came from which and applies those movements to the items in your file. So
you've just blown everyone's mind. You've just made it so much easier. I mean, I see.
It'll be simpler to use.
I'm bother you until you tell us that really
it's a stopgap, and we know it's a stopgap. But I think it'll help. I think it'll genuinely help people, and it'll be a way for people to use nesting in a way that's accessible and a way that doesn't affect, like, it keeps all of your cut settings. If you have shape properties, for example, like if you made a rectangle with rounded corners, the way that it works right now, you would have to export that as an SVG, run it through SVGNest, import that back again, and now it's no longer a rectangle with rounded corners. Now it's just a shape.
Right.
And if you exported text and imported it back, it would just be shapes now. It wouldn't be text in Lightburn that you could edit. And with the new way of doing it, it's still all Lightburn's objects. It's just applying those movements and the reorganization to your existing project. So you don't lose any of the properties. You don't lose any of the information in your Lightburn file. It's just moving things. So I think that one's going to help a bunch of people. I
guarantee
I've played with it a bit.
That's awesome.
And SVGNest can be a little fussy and a little tweaky, but it works quite well. I've been pretty happy with it so far. What else? Oh, pen. When you're using line mode, you can now create spline shapes, kind of like you can with Inkscape. If you click and hold and drag, it will create art or create curves. So it's no longer just creating straight lines.
Awesome.
So that one's one.
I told you I'd crack him. I told you he'll tell us some stuff. Just
these ones I can.
No, that's cool.
These ones I can talk about because they're not huge.
So they're not. Well, you say they're not huge, but for people using the software, those sort of functionality is a big deal. And especially, you know, the idea of being able to integrate using a third party to Nest. I remember seeing Dominic at Darkly Labs using the nesting functions for one of his projects, and it was, you know, he designed all the parts and then he had to spit them all out, and then he had to, you know, go and there were problems with it, if I remember correctly. I think there were certain shapes that because they were modified by the nesting process, that he had to go and do that by hand. Had to change
them back again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, the idea of being able to do that and at least integrate most of that within Lightburn and then have that editing ability still is, man, you know, I'm going to say it again. It sounds a bit like a cliche, but it's a bit of a game changer when you're using that sort of function in the first place. And on top of that, I know there's going to be a whole lot of people who didn't even know what nesting was that will now go out and play with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's neat. If you are doing a job where you're trying to cram the largest number of shapes into a piece of material, you know, if you've got something that's expensive, like if you're working with metal, I mean, you're probably not with a diode laser, but
who says so?
If you've got a piece of exotic wood, if you are, you know, that kind of thing, or you're working with acrylics or something like that, if you're doing a multi-layer file where you're cutting out pieces and then kind of dropping them into slots. People have done like name puzzles for their children, things like that, where you cut out a base plate and then you cut out the name from a piece of material and then you cut out all the letters. There's ways to do all of the letters now. You can pack them together into a small piece of material. So instead of cutting just a typed out name, you know, you can cut all of those letters jumbled up and rearranged so that they take a smaller piece of material to cut them from. So that's useful.
When I did my NASA logo project, it was one of the first Lightburn projects that I did on YouTube. One of the things that I did, I had these huge letters, these NASA worm logos from the 70s, and then I manually went in and resized so that all the cutout parts were still being used. Because otherwise, it was just going to go to waste. It was just going to go to scrap, and that's kind of what you're talking about: is being able to take part of the project instead of it just being a linear where that piece of material is used and you might not be able to use the material around. Being able to shape that up into a smaller area, and the real trick with that is being able to, if you are cutting out, you know, a piece that is going to be scrap, being able to use that allows you to go a lot further with your materials and costs.
Yep, so that one's fun. We've got some other tricks up our sleeve, but those are the ones I can talk about for now.
Oh, well, you know what? I'm glad you did. It is awesome that you share that with us here. Jason, if I don't get the chance to speak to you directly before Christmas, New Year's, I hope you have a fantastic holiday season.
Thank you. You as well.
Do not work too hard, but keep at it because we really do appreciate it.
I'm not sure I know how to do that. You can ask my girlfriend. I think she'll back me up there.
You know what? I believe that there's someone in the other room who will sit there and say to me, how can you say that to Jason when you're up till 2 a.m. getting things ready? And I'm like, because you know what? That's our intention. Our intention is to have a nice work-life balance. But when you love something, especially in your case, Lightburn, and for me, the social media laser-induced content that I create, that's your baby. And when you care about something,
it's hard to disconnect.
Yeah, it totally is. But the cool thing is, everyone who's using the software is reaping the rewards. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Can we catch up with you in 2022 when we can talk about all the things that you just mentioned to us? And it's like, that's passé. Wait till you hear what's coming up next.
I think we can do that, yes.
Excellent. I look forward to it. I want to take a moment out to thank Jason from Lightburn for taking out the time in his day to come and chat with us all about Lightburn. Now, if you liked this interview and want to learn more about Lightburn and what it can do, check out these videos right here to deep dive into what you can create with your laser. Let us know if you like these interviews and you want to hear more from the people behind the scenes at Lightburn. Till next time, go and make something amazing with your laser.